Hey, just thank you for the opportunity to continue our conversation about continuous improvement. And as you move on your own personal journey, I just want to remind everybody that fundamentally, the Toyota production system and lean, as it was invented and created and promulgated by folks like Taiichi Ohno, who took his lessons from his predecessors at Toyota. Fundamentally, we're talking about a human system, and in particular, a human system which exists to tap well into the intellectual horsepower of the enterprise. And yes, there's the obvious attention to material going through machinery. Toyota makes cars after all. But in the mind of the folks who were the real geniuses who created the system and made it an institution, which has led to utter dominance in the world auto industry since the 1980s. The folks who created this system, they thought of machines as the mechanism through which people individually and collectively expressed what they've discovered, again, individually and collectively. It wasn't about the material and the machines, it was about the people and the minds, with the machines merely instruments for the expression of wisdom, useful wisdom that was constantly being developed, grown, and then expressed. And so as you start looking at processes, and in particular processes which are less physical, less tangible, more intangible, more administrative, a couple of things to keep in mind which get into the construction of the social overlay, enterprise processes, systems, et cetera, which are better suited towards the tapping into the individual and the collective wisdom that we bring under one roof, again, literally or metaphorically. So first thing I want you to think about as you go through this is this idea of simplifying the flow of work, and in this case, the flow of ideas through a system. I've set this up that, when we think about systems existing to maximize, accelerate the flow of material through machines, what do? Well, we say, well, we've got stuff coming in over here, and we'll go to the first available machine. And then when it's done at that machine, it'll enter a queue, go to the next available machine, first available, et cetera. And I suppose somehow maybe that makes sense when we're talking strictly, absolutely, positively in the total extreme of inanimate stuff going through inanimate machines, waiting to get processed again by other inanimate things to become more inanimate stuff. But the truth is, even on the shop floor, who is using those machines? People. And when we create systems like that, while the material and the machines may not care, the people do. And the reason for that is, again, looking at this upset person in the middle of such a highly intertwined, overly complex process, is that that person has to worry about all these upstream relationships in terms of, when are you giving me something, in what content, in what format, et cetera? When are you giving me something, with what content, with what format? When are you giving me something, with what content, with what format? And then having to have all these relationship conversations downstream in terms of, here's what I'm giving you, when and how, and blah, blah, blah. And here's what I'm giving you, when and how, blah, blah, blah. And here's what I'm giving you, when and how, and blah, blah, blah. So the first lesson we should really keep in mind as we assess and analyze processes is, are they or can they be simplified? And why is that? Because now imagine the person who's got a piece of work in the middle of this flow, who can now have fewer conversations, richer, deeper conversations, because there are fewer of them, of what can I expect from you in terms of, and what do I need from you in terms of content, timing, format, et cetera, and what do you need from me, and what can you expect from me in terms of content, format, timing, et cetera, and so forth. And by reducing the number of conversations, the depth of them can go greater. And by having greater depth, what we're doing is we're liberating what is rich but still finite bandwidth and intellectual horsepower, liberating it to actually solve the technical problems in front of us. So first thing is, you start looking at processes in terms of assessment or prescription. Question is, to what extent are they complicated, convoluted, and consequently very confusing as on the left, or simplified and less distracting as on the right? Second question I ask here is, to what extent have we created standards? Now, the term standards has gotten such a terrible misunderstanding, and we can go way back to Frederick Taylor, who was a condescending, arrogant, basically racist individual. I mean, full of good ideas that, take the collective wisdom that we have about something, approach a new test scientifically, and design it with the best possible understanding. The problem with Taylor is that, he thought he and his few friends had all the wisdom in the world and all the creativity in the world, and everyone else is just a bunch of dumb lugs who had to be told which shovel to pick up and how much to put on each shovel load, as if their biceps and shoulders wouldn't give them at least that information, if not better. And so thinking better about what a standard is a way to capture in word and capture in deed the wisdom of all those who've preceded us and all the events that precede the event we're in, and give us an opportunity to approach the new event better informed by the best known approach. So that's useful in its own right. And also by having a standard, being able to better see when, where, and in what fashion problems are occurring. And so as you go through this process of your continuous improvement journey, don't shy away from, in fact, embrace standards and promote standards, not as some means of command control, so on and so on, some really diminishing way of thinking about people and their role in the organization. Think about standards as a way to equip someone who may be otherwise ill-prepared, equip that person to take advantage of all the experiences that preceded them, bring those all together, focused into that moment, and increase their chance of success, and also create the opportunity to see when they're struggling, when they're failing, so they see it early and often before the problem has a chance to snowball. So anyway, simplification versus complexity, standards versus non-standards. And I guess one way to think about standards versus non-standards is providing someone with wisdom versus leaving them ill-equipped and unprepared. Third design feature I encourage you to do is think about this idea of stabilization. Now, whatever work you happen to be looking at, whether it's work here or work over there, or way up the supply chain, out in fields, in factories, whatever else, whether it's on shop floors, people using, or in fields, people using equipment, or people working on desktops and workstations and that kind of thing. You're talking about complex systems, and you're talking about systems which are dynamic, many things moving against many other things in often unpredictable, sometimes unwanted, but certainly unpredictable ways. So then you get into the question, what happens when something goes wrong? And in a lot of cases, unfortunately, people are told, well, just suck it up, make do. But of course, what happens then is that the person who's experiencing that difficulty, they're experiencing that difficulty with an amplitude and with a duration far greater than necessary. And why is that? Because when the problem occurred, nothing was done to contain it. Not only that, by the fact that they're having a problem which is greater in amplitude and longer in duration than otherwise might be necessary, the problem will escape. And how will it escape? Because if I'm spending so much time doing something, which I thought would take a minute, an hour, a day, whatever our unit is, let's say a day, and starting to spill into day 2 and day 3, then whatever the person downstream needed from me, they're not getting the person upstream. I'm now blocking the advance of their work through the system. Or because I feel so anxious about getting it done in a day, what do I hand forward? Junk, right? So either way, the problem escapes. So what's the solution to prevent, or at least reduce aggravation and prevent escape, is have a stabilization mechanism so that when something goes wrong, it's quickly identified. It's kind of like the principle of Jidoka that the folks at Toyota thought so highly of. It's quickly identified, and then it gets escalated, the idea of andon, so that someone can come over and say, what's the problem? How can I help? Reduce the amplitude, reduce the duration, and prevent the opportunity for the problem to escape and become disruptive. Now, last thing I just want to offer, and this is in terms of recognizing that we organize to harness the intellectual horsepower of many people towards common purpose. Said differently, the reason we create organizations in the first place is so that collectively we can solve problems which defy individual resolution, is to liberate for people the opportunity to continue to do the deliberate, analytical, thoughtful, creative, contemplative thinking, so they don't get sucked into the high speed, compulsive, impetuous behavior that ongoing operations require. And I think we've all seen this, is that you've set up an operating system, but every time someone needs to know what to do next, how to do it, they have to go up. They have to go to production control in a factory. They have to go to the program manager, the project manager, their boss, in a more service situation. I remember being in a factory where they worked off a production schedule every day. So there was the morning schedule, came out about 6:30 in the morning. Then there was the modification on the schedule, that was 7 o'clock. Then there was a hot list, which was once information was actually drawn out of the base plate operations that went up, was reconsidered. There was a hot list, then there was a double hot list, and a triple hot list, a quadruple hot list. And then there were the supervisors running around. And why was that? Because here they were trying to pull information out of a process which operated at its own cycle time, with its own frequency, its own speed, its own level of detail. And they could never keep up with the speed, the frequency, or the level of detail. And they're trying to make sense all the time. So production list, hot list, double hot list, expediting, firefighting, this thing and that thing. And you ended up in this terrible situation that they were taking really corrupted signal off the shop floor, reacting to it too slow, too little, injecting what they thought was signal back, and they were just adding noise back into the system, and it just didn't work. So anyway, another thing I encourage you to think about as you go forward on this is simplify processes, add standards. The adding of standards makes it much easier to see problems. When problems are seen, swarm on them to contain them, to stabilize the system. And then as you go forward, try and think about how can you build systems where the operational work, production, design, administration, et cetera, that as things move through the system, the things downstream are setting the pace for the things upstream, and the things upstream are interacting and balancing to the pace and the cycle times and the mix and match of the things downstream. So the people over here who can actually see the system as a whole, because they're not doing the direct work, they can keep in the slow, deliberative, analytical mode of observing, monitoring, assessing, approving, improving, without being sucked down into the day-to-day operation. You keep the fast, the frequent, the detailed signaling down here where it belongs, so that these folks can take in the data from the longer runs and greater swaths to figure out how to make things better. Anyway, where does this leave us? Again, as you go out and do your work, remember, the reason we have an organization in the first place is to engage the intellectual horsepower of people. It's not just the repetitive muscle power of people. And to engage their intellectual horsepower, the reason we're doing that is we're trying to get that intellectual horsepower to collaboratively, collectively solve problems that defy individual resolution. And in order to do that, we have to design systems where the systems themselves reduce the confusion, reduce the noise, reduce the aggravation, reduce the distraction, so people can do the work in front of them and the work in front of their peers here and their peers here. And the folks up here aren't constantly being sucked into the moment by moment operational whack-a-mole problems, and they can look at the system and design it. They can sustain its operation. They can help with its improvement through this synchronization mechanism. So simplification, standardization, stabilization, and synchronization. And those four things, no matter where you apply them, will make the experience and the productivity of all those with whom you engage, it'll make it much better. Thank you.